world. My next guest is an experienced marketer, innovator, and growth hacker with an expertise in digital marketing and artificial intelligence. She's my go-to when it comes to growth marketing. Please welcome Ilana Shabtay, VP Marketing at Fullpath, to the show. Ilana, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
I think I'm always ready for that. Yeah. Thanks
You
for
might
having me.
be. Absolutely. Welcome to the show. Listen, you may be one of the most transparent marketers I've ever met. And I've been counting down to get you on this show because that's what we are on the show, radically transparent, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you so
So,
much. I
of,
appreciate that.
of course. So, listen, I'm going to kick off and hoping you'll be as transparent as possible with me on this question, right? Because I think in today's marketing world, there's a lot to talk about. What professionally these days are keeping you up?
So I think there's basically two things that probably keep all marketers up at night: increasing MQLs, and then how do I create a really strong brand? Um, so for me, both of those things I could say probably keep me up at night. The latter for sure more. So thinking about um, putting out and testing strong brand campaigns is something that like keeps me on edge more than the MQLs, only because in its nature, it's much harder to measure, at least short term. Long term, you can put in all these sorts of metrics, and I'm sure we'll get into that in this episode. But um, it's much harder to quantify on the one hand, and on the other hand, I find as a B2B marketer, there are a lot of challenges with brand campaigns. So I think about that all the time. And I think every single marketer should be thinking about their machine and having their machine work. And that machine should just be bringing MQLs. And of course, if it's not, that will keep you up at night. And then couple that strategy with really strong, really creative, really bold brand campaigns that are obviously a bit more like risky, which would, by nature also keep you up at night.
Absolutely. Listen, right. Being a good marketer, you definitely have to take risks.
Yes.
And I agree with you that there's this fine balance between brand and your MQLs and lead generation. And so when I think about being a marketing leader and balancing those two things and knowing you have to take risks, how do you manage the transition dip, I'll call it, in leads when you do take a risk or you implement a new strategy or you want to try something new?
The transition dip. I like that. You should coin that. Um, I think of it as it's a great question. I think there are two things. There's what I call or what I think about as alignment and benchmark slash baseline. So I'll speak to alignment first. Everything is about aligning expectations, not just within your team, which I think is also really important. Just getting everyone on your team on the same page. Also aligning with other teams, right? So as a marketing leader and department, you have to deliver leads, for example, to the sales team. So aligning with the sales team on what this transition might look like, and then of course with exec and leadership team, it's really aligning and making sure that they're aware of the transition, why you're doing it, and what to expect. So that's the first thing that I think is really important. And then the second thing I think that's imperative whenever making a very big strategic or small strategic change is making sure that you have your baseline and or benchmark before the transition. Have that metric in mind. That's going to be your baseline. Then you want to decide how long am I going to go before I create my new baseline? Is that 60 days? Is that 90 days? That transition, it might be off. That's fine. And then you create your new baseline. By the way, the new baseline doesn't have to be the same as the previous baseline, but like having those baselines, how many times can I say baseline? Having those baselines really help with the transition and with the alignment that I spoke about earlier. So having that metric to guide you, I think really helps with making sure that everyone's on the same page and helps with taking risks because you have something to fall back on.
Yeah, totally. So, I agree with you aligning expectations. And when I think about some of the challenges, I know in itself aligning expectations is a challenge.
That is
What are
correct.
some of the other challenges that you face when you're building and testing if we shift over to like brand campaigns, for example?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think, and I touched on this a little bit in the intro, but I think in general, brand campaigns can be really hard, specifically, again, for B2B marketers, because when I think of like an amazing brand campaign, I'm thinking of like a deodorant commercial where I've just like, the emotion is evoked in me as a consumer, and that's it, I'm going to buy. When you're running a brand campaign and trying to evoke emotion from a B2B perspective, you have to evoke emotion in like three different personas and three different decision making personas. And you need to make sure that every single kind of like challenge is hit in a very short amount of time. And it's a different buying process. That's obviously, I think, a challenge. Another challenge is metrics and measuring success of a brand campaign. It's not, I think if you think about it as the long-term umbrella metrics that you want to look at, that's very helpful. But you still need the short-term metrics that you're going to think about when you are running a brand campaign. So you can get specific based on the brand campaign. Are you running like a survey and a report? Then maybe you should be looking at like press hits or like journalist inquiries. If you're running a video, obviously you want to look at impressions of that and reach and then referral traffic from that video. So like those metrics will be different in the short term, but the umbrella metrics are going to be something like, search terms. How many people are looking for my company? Like how many times is my name actually showing up as a brand, as a keyword search term? So that's like the long-term stuff.
Yeah.
I know this doesn't directly answer your question. I'm going into like another world here, but I think like it's a challenge, but once you figure out how to figure out the metrics and align with your team on what those metrics are, it does make it a lot easier.
Absolutely. Listen, I think figuring out the metrics for what we want to do as B2B marketers is probably one of the most challenging pieces of the journey.
Yeah.
What are some of the what are you how are you approaching, right, finding or labeling those metrics or putting metrics to those, brand campaigns or initiatives? I mean, are you like how are you choosing them? Does the team come together? Are you selecting them? Like what are you basing them off of?
It's another great question. I have things in mind always, and I talk to the team about it. I think whoever owns the project should really own the metrics as well, and I work with my team very closely on what those metrics look like based on different projects and different project owners. For brand campaigns specifically, we always think about them with the umbrella metrics, which is like organic search, for example, versus the nitty gritty metrics that we want to look at when we come to the actual campaign that we're running, whether that's an ad again or a video, events, roadshow, whatever it might be. But I do think as a marketing leader, it's really important to empower your teams to be close to the data. So you can be, and I think it's really important as a marketing team to also live close to the data. So you can be as data obsessed as you want, but if your team isn't working against metrics as well, then you're living in like a siloed world from your team. And also, I think it's a really good coachable and trainable thing to do with your team, especially a marketing team, right? You want everyone to have their own metrics. You want them to be able to track them. So again, I'll throw things out there, but the project owner will kind of like come up with some kind of template and then we'll run with it.
I think that's a really powerful, transparent statement that not all of us marketers always are transparent enough to say. I think sometimes it's expected because marketing and marketing teams and different roles within a marketing organization, they're independent of one another oftentimes. So I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times we expect marketers to come to the table with knowing exactly what they need to measure. They know their craft best. We work a lot with social media managers. We expect them to come, into the role as a social media manager and know exactly what it is they need to measure as the owner of their craft. And I love how you are encouraging your team to be able to not only have the conversations of, okay, let's understand the metric, why we're doing the metric, what the metric means, and work collectively together to make sure we're all on the same page. And I think that's really important as a leader. So thank you for calling that out.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's actually something I implemented pretty recently. So I also needed like the wake up call because I was thinking, and if we're being really transparent, I'm happy to share this, but I was like, okay, I am so data obsessed. I look at this spreadsheet that I have every single day. I mean, we have a great tech stack. We have HubSpot, we have Salesforce. I'm still in spreadsheets. I don't know why. That's a conversation for another time, but I have this spreadsheet and I look at it every day and I realize that I want to make sure that that my team is really learning how to live by the metrics as well. They're much better than me when it comes to utilizing our software for reports. So they'll build reports in HubSpot, they'll build reports in Data Studio, and I admire them and aspire to be like that one day. I'm still in all my spreadsheets. I mean, eventually maybe we can have another podcast in like a year and we could talk about reporting, and hopefully I'll graduate to something more sophisticated.
I love it. Listen, now I'm just curious. So you're saying you're working with a team. You have you can have your spreadsheet. The team can have their tech. Um, but when you talk about brand campaigns, right? Not only is it hard to measure it, but a question
Mm-hmm.
to you is how do you know when it's time to like sunset that brand campaign or it's time to kill it? What are you looking at? How do you make that call? Because it is long term.
Yeah. So I don't know the right answer to that. I think there are a few different ways to approach it. One of the things that I like doing is that baseline approach. So even though we talked about that from a strategy perspective, I think it still applies here. So if you have that 60, 90, 120, obviously with brand campaign, it's usually a little bit longer. When you have that time frame that you set beforehand and you can test something against a benchmark that you create before the campaign launches, that's a really good way to have some kind of idea of, is this brand campaign bringing what we want.
Yeah.
So I would say creating that before you even launch the brand campaign will be helpful in knowing should you sunset it. The other thing that I think is really important is always testing. So for example, we're doing now some video campaigns with brand commercials, and we're using an agency to help us with our reach. We're also running these commercials in our internal YouTube accounts, our internal Google accounts, and I'm cross-referencing the results. Now it's obviously not apples to apples. One is OTT, one is YouTube, but still, I think having some kind of like comparison and or test helps you at the very least make those decisions along the way, eventually sunset based on optimizations along the way.
Right, right. And listen, I think it's hard, right? Because you're constantly balancing the need to invest in your brand. We all know as marketers, we need
Yes.
to do brand campaigns with the pressure of delivering those immediate results, which we go back to like the MQLs, right? And we need to be constantly delivering. So how do you balance those two things within the team and yourself?
I would say very transparently, in the spirit of today's conversation, you cannot deliver fast brand campaign results. And if you're under the pressure to do it, there's other ways to deliver results while you're testing things. So I talked a little bit about the machine. I think it's really important for every marketer to have some kind of machine set up, right? You have campaigns that work day over day, week over week. You obviously optimize them and move them around, but you need something, lead nurture campaigns in your emails, webinars. You need this like whole machine to be working and bringing you X and some kind of predictable amount of MQLs so that you can test things in parallel. So when you are testing things, you can say, hey, we're still delivering. This is what we're bringing. The brand campaign, wait 90 days, wait 120 days, and then I'll get back to you. And I think if you can do that, you're first of all an extremely strong marketer. So like, let me know what you're doing. I would love to know. And two, I think it really does position. I think it's really important before you test all the time and like put out all this risky stuff. You do need to be more consistent and be more predictable, and then go out and make some crazy bold statements.
I love that. I love that. Speaking of bold, speaking of risks, can you share perhaps a recent example of a time you took a risk with a new marketing strategy or a new thought, and what was the outcome?
Sure. So first thing that comes to mind is a big move we made at Fullpath, the marketing team, about a year ago at this point, which was moving from lead gen to demand gen. So what that meant was all of our content was gated. We were really optimized for lead generation. So everything was about getting leads and optimizing for cost per lead. A strategy that I think worked for us in that given state. We moved into demand gen, where we decided to focus on creating pipeline and more inbound, like more, how do I say this? Like we do bring in leads of all of the
Of
entire
course.
funnel,
Yes.
but we want to focus on leads that are more educated and closer to the buying process, I would say. So moving from lead gen to demand gen was a huge risk. We basically ungated all of our content. We let everything available on our website. Our leads dropped. Like we knew our leads were going to drop, obviously, because you're
But you
getting all
set
these
the
leads.
expectation, right?
But you set the expectation and you have your baseline metrics. But it was still a huge risk, meaning it could be that we weren't ready for it yet. And at that point, after 3 months, maybe we weren't going to see the lift that we wanted to see, or we weren't going to see the conversion rate to sale that we'd want to see. Like there are a lot of risks in it. It was a huge risk. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what we've been seeing, but that was probably the biggest project beyond changing our name, our company name. That was a huge risk and a huge project. That really helped shape the way that our marketing team works and the way that we deliver to our sales team now.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about like the results that have come of that, especially a year later when, right, we know most marketers, right, whatever we do usually has, a year later impact.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. I will say that there are some things now that I do want to gate. It's the first time after a year. I'm like, okay, I think if we have a really nice report, there are some things that we should gate. Like our some of our content should be downloadable, and I'm thinking now about how to integrate into the strategy a year later, wondering if there's like some hybrid magic approach here that I haven't yet tested. So I have those thoughts, but in terms of results, we do see a slight dip in leads, especially during the transition period, but we see a much higher conversion rate from lead to sale, and we see a much higher demo show rate, and we see a much faster lead to sale close. So the metrics that really matter have been impacted positively significantly. And the metrics that don't as much matter once you move to demand gen, we are trying to like obviously close the gap. We want to get as many leads as possible, but we want those leads to close. We want them to show up to demos. We want them to close fast. So all of that's working really well. I am a big proponent of demand gen. I think that at a certain point, every company should move to demand gen. I think when companies are really young, they should not, or they should have some hybrid, because you need it. You need the leads to come in. Like you need people to know who you are. You need it for prospecting. Like you can get really good prospect information from the lead downloads. It's just all about creating the right content follow-up strategies with lead gen and demand gen. But with lead gen more specifically, you'll have a lot of different funnels based on what they're downloading and how they're interacting with your content. I will also say, now that I'm talking about interacting with content, is that there's two other really significant changes with demand gen. One of them is that all of your content now lives on your website. So it's really good for SEO, because someone isn't asking for something and you're either sending it over email or it's like on a PDF somewhere in your browser. It actually lives in your website. So your SEO is going to skyrocket, which is awesome for your brand. And you can get more sophisticated with your like your targeting and your retargeting and your audiences, because you can see how people are interacting with your content, because again, it lives on your website. So how much time are people spending on case studies? How much of a video are people watching? How long are they staying on a page? So you can create really interesting funnels based on people's interactions with your content.
Wow. Well, one, congratulations, because I don't know if I would have, I mean, that's a huge risk to come in and say, hey, that's it.
Yeah, it was.
No more gating. And I could imagine the reactions of, some team members. So congratulations
Yeah.
on navigating, setting the expectations and executing. That's really impressive.
Thanks. Thank
Um,
you. I had an awesome team, like an amazing team that helped us do it.
Shout out to the team. So
Yeah.
listen, with that being said, I'm now curious, putting our marketing hats to the side, we're gonna close out the show with probably my favorite question. What is one thing that you can share with us that we actually can't learn about you from your LinkedIn profile?
Okay, so one thing that you can't learn about me from my LinkedIn profile, but you will learn about it from my Instagram, is that I'm obsessed with wine. I love wine. I love any kind of wine. Cocktails I also like, but mostly just espresso martinis, which Colin knows about. So shout out to Colin. So that's one thing. I wish I could put it more on LinkedIn, but I feel like I shouldn't. So if it's definitely on social media, but not on LinkedIn. And I also hip hop dance, which is really fun.
That is really fun. What's
Not
one of
the
the
two together, but
I love that. Are there any YouTube videos, or was this before the YouTube era time?
Okay, so it was definitely before YouTube era time. I just started dancing again here in Tel Aviv, and I sometimes will post things on my Instagram, but not always. And they're always stories because they disappear. I can't have anyone to have that kind of blackmail on me. Absolutely not.
I love it. So listen, anyone listening in, they want to learn more about Fullpath. They want to understand more about, taking those risks when doing any sort of, whether it's brand campaign or, ungating content. Where's the best place someone can reach you?
LinkedIn, I'm really responsive on LinkedIn, Ilana Shabtay. So that's really good. You can also always email me at ilana@fullpath.com.
Fantastic. Ilana, thank you so much for getting radically transparent with me today. And we look forward to having you back to speak about reporting soon.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me.